The trauma bay fell silent the moment a wounded commander saluted the new night nurse. Not the surgeon fighting to keep him alive. Not the armed men at the door. Her. And if you have ever learned too late that grief does not bury the truth, this story is going to stay with you. It was 2:14 a.m. in San Diego. Rain hammered the ambulance ramp. Monitors screamed. The floor shone under white hospital light while exhausted nurses moved on instinct, one crisis rolling into the next. Evelyn Shaw thought she was working just another brutal night shift, the kind where you keep strangers alive and leave your own pain untouched. Then a man came in, bleeding from a covert mission, looked straight at her, and whispered a word only her dead father should have known. Watch to the end. Like the video, and tell me where you're watching from tonight. A word only her dead father should have known. An hour earlier, before the rain turned the ambulance ramp into a river of reflected red and blue, the night had looked ordinary enough to fool anybody who did not work in a trauma hospital. Harbor Line Medical Center in San Diego never really slept. It only changed tones. By day, it was sharp and public, full of clipped footsteps, family updates, and bright voices trying too hard to sound hopeful. By night, the building settled into something stranger and more honest. The lights seemed harsher after midnight. The air carried the smell of antiseptic burnt coffee wet jackets, and the metallic trace of blood that no amount of industrial cleaner ever quite erased. Every sound traveled farther. A monitor alarm 2 halls over could feel like it was happening inside your own chest. Evelyn Shaw moved through that world the way some people moved through church quietly, without waste, as if she understood the difference between urgency and panic better than most. She had been at Harbor Line for just under 4 months, long enough for the regular staff to trust her hands, and short enough that they still called her the new night nurse when they thought she could not hear them. She did hear them. She simply did not care. New was easier than explaining the truth. New sounded like a decision. New sounded like possibility. New did not sound like a 41-year-old trauma nurse who had packed up her apartment outside Savannah in 3 sleepless days after her mother's funeral, because every room had begun to feel like it was watching her sort through what grief had missed. New did not sound like a woman who had taken a transfer across the country because distance was easier to explain than the kind of restlessness that woke her at 2 in the morning, with the feeling that something unfinished was moving through the walls. At 1:08 a.m., she was in Trauma 4, securing a pressure dressing on a construction foreman who had split open his scalp on a steel beam. He smelled like dust, sweat, and stubborn pride. Blood had dried black in the silver at his temple. "You all trying to shave me for free," he muttered while Evelyn cleaned the edge of the wound. "You came in with a head injury and an opinion," she said. "One of those is treatable." His daughter, who had been standing near the sink with both arms folded tight over her chest, laughed before she could stop herself. The sound loosened the room a little. The foreman squinted up at Evelyn, as if deciding whether he liked being handled by somebody who did not waste sympathy on performance. He let out a breath through his nose and held still while she lined up the stapler. "You from the South?" he asked. Evelyn pressed the last staple into place. "I was." "That sounds like a story." "It sounds like discharge paperwork," she said. The daughter smiled her thanks while Evelyn stripped off her gloves. By the time she stepped back into the corridor, the smile was already gone. That was part of the discipline. Families needed steadiness more than they needed intimacy. In a trauma center, people told you the most painful truths of their lives while you adjusted drips and taped down lines. If you carried every story home, you did not last. If you carried none of them, you should not be there in the first place. Evelyn had found the narrow ground in between. That was one reason other nurses trusted her and residents feared her. She could be warm without becoming soft. She could be kind without losing control of the room. A second-year resident nearly collided with her outside the medication room, a tablet balanced on one hand and nerves all over his face. "Sorry, I was looking for Dr. Reeves." "She prefers being found before somebody says sorry," Evelyn said. "Try the fast-track bay. Chest pain rule out." He blinked, once corrected course, and hurried away. Evelyn kept walking. Dr. Naomi Reeves was the kind of surgeon who seemed built out of hard corners and exact judgment. She was brilliant, ruthless with inefficiency, and so unimpressed by hierarchy that it made weaker men nervous. During Evelyn's second week at Harbor Line, Reeves had watched her manage a combative overdose patient, and later said to another attending not quietly enough, "She is the kind you want standing next to you when the floor starts sinking." Evelyn had heard it while restocking Central Line kits. She had closed the drawer and said nothing. Praise was useful only when it bought room to work. At 1:21 a.m., she finally reached the break room. The place was too cold, too bright, and smelled faintly of instant soup and exhausted people. Someone had left half a blueberry muffin on a paper towel beside a stack of continuing education flyers no one intended to read. Rain stitched the small window over the sink with restless silver. Tessa Moreno sat at the table with one shoe off, rubbing the arch of her foot against her opposite ankle, while she stared at her phone. She looked up as Evelyn entered. "You remember sleep?" Tessa asked. Vaguely, Evelyn said, pouring coffee into a paper cup. "I think it used to be a hobby." Tessa grinned. "You are fitting in. I was hoping to avoid that." Tessa watched her take a sip and grimace. "That bad? It tastes like punishment." "Drink it anyway. We are out of mercy." Evelyn leaned against the counter rather than sit. If she sat, her body might mistake it for permission. Tessa studied her over the rim of a water bottle. "Can I ask you something? That has never stopped anyone." Tessa smiled, then turned serious. "You always this calm, or is that just your work face?" Evelyn looked at the rain on the glass. "My work face pays the bills." That was not really an answer. It was the useful part of one. Tessa laughed softly, but she did not let the matter drop. "Do you have family out here?" The question hung between them longer than it should have. Not because it was intrusive. In a hospital, personal questions often arrived disguised as ordinary conversation. The problem was that some answers opened doors Evelyn had spent years keeping shut. "No," she said. Again, not the whole truth, only the manageable piece. Her mother, Ruth Shaw, had died 6 months earlier in coastal Georgia, after a slow collapse that had started in the heart moved through the lungs and then into memory, with a cruelty that felt procedural. At first it was small things: a missing word, a burned pan, a story retold halfway through itself. Then it became larger: keys in the freezer, a church address written on the back of a utility bill, the front door locked twice, then checked 3 times more. By the last year, Ruth would sometimes stand at the kitchen window after midnight with the lights off, one hand resting on the sink, staring out into the dark backyard, as if she were waiting for movement nobody else could see. Evelyn used to come in quietly and say, "Mama, what are you doing?" Ruth would turn too fast as though surprised to be found there. Could not sleep. That was always the answer. After a while, Evelyn stopped asking if it was true. Age made people strange. Illness made them stranger. That was what she had told herself, and it had been enough right up until the funeral. The service itself had been small because Ruth had wanted it that way. Church friends, neighbors, a few cousins who spoke in gentle voices and brought casseroles nobody touched. The pastor said the things pastors say when the body in front of them belonged to a decent woman who had suffered with more patience than she deserved to. Evelyn stood in black shoes, sinking slightly into damp ground, and listened to people tell her her mother was at peace, reunited, restored. Reunited with whom had remained an open question in her mind for almost 20 years. Officially, Daniel Shaw. Her father had died in a naval training accident off the Georgia coast when Evelyn was 22. There had been a car in the driveway before dawn, then 2 officers at the front door in dress whites, then words delivered in the careful, measured tone people use when they have rehearsed tragedy for strangers. There had been a folded flag, there had been no body. "Not all remains are recovered," one of them had said. Ruth had thanked them with a face so still it looked carved. She had shut the door, slid the deadbolt with both hands, and stood in the foyer without speaking for so long that Evelyn had finally touched her shoulder just to prove the world still contained living things. Grief changed Ruth after that, but not in the ways people expected. She did not become dramatic. She became quieter, more exact. She began keeping small objects in odd places. Pencil notes inside recipe cards, tide tables tucked into hymnals, old weather reports folded into the pages of church cookbooks. She wrote phone numbers in the margins of junk mail, then erased them until the paper thinned. She clipped notices from the newspaper and kept them in envelopes with no labels. Evelyn had called it coping. Later, she called it decline. Then, 3 weeks after the funeral, while clearing out the cedar chest at the foot of Ruth's bed, Evelyn found an envelope that changed the shape of everything she thought she understood. It had no name on it, no date, no stamp. Just thick cream paper gone yellow at the edges, hidden beneath a stack of scarves and old family linens. Inside was a photograph of her father standing on a dock at dusk with 3 other men. Daniel looked younger than the version she carried in memory, harder in the face, less open. The men beside him had all had their faces scratched out with something sharp until white scars cut through the image. On the back, in Ruth's neat hand, were 4 words. Never trust the uniforms. There was a second piece of paper folded inside. Heavy stock. A symbol drawn in faded ink. A thin circle around a dark center point with lines radiating out like a compass that had been broken and redrawn from memory. No explanation, no signature, no comfort. Evelyn had sat on the bedroom floor with the envelope in her lap and felt a very specific kind of cold move through her. Not fear. Not exactly. Rearrangement. The sensation that something buried in the middle of her life had not died at all. It had only been pressed under enough official language to pass for truth. She told no one. Not the pastor. Not the attorney handling the estate. Not the one friend in Georgia who would have listened without judgment. She slipped the envelope into the back of a file drawer, went to work the next morning, and pretended her hands were not shaking when she checked a ventilator setting in ICU. A month later, she requested a transfer. San Diego made practical sense on paper. Harborline was busy, understaffed, and known for not coddling people who could not handle real trauma. The pay was better. The cases were bigger. Military traffic moved through the city in a way that felt professionally useful. All of that was true. The deeper truth sat lower and hit harder. San Diego lived at the meeting point of medicine, water, and command structures. Navy lives brushed up against civilian systems every day there. Records passed through the city. Men in uniform moved through its hospitals, bars, airports, parking garages, and coastline like weather. If anything about Daniel Shaw had ever been buried inside official machinery, the shadow of that machinery stretched through places like this. Evelyn told herself she was moving on. The more honest version was that she had started listening for echoes. Tessa was still watching her in the break room. "Sorry," she said, gentler now. "You do not have to answer stuff like that." Evelyn gave a small nod. "It is fine." It was not fine. It was simply contained. The overhead speaker cracked to life before Tessa could say anything else. Trauma alert. 2 minutes. Male. Penetrating torso injury. Possible blast trauma. The room changed shape all at once. Tessa jammed her shoe back on. Evelyn dropped the coffee into the trash after one last bitter swallow. Across the hall, a unit secretary was already on the phone with blood bank. Somebody shouted for portable ultrasound. Doors opened, feet moved. That was the thing about emergency medicine. No matter what private weather a person carried inside them, the floor did not care. The next crisis arrived on schedule, whether your world was steady or not. Back in the corridor, the trauma team converged with the speed of habit. Gloves, gowns, warm fluids, suction check, airway cart, extra pressure tubing. Evelyn tied her gown and moved into Trauma 1. A resident began briefing her from a tablet while nearly walking into a supply cart. Field report says possible maritime op, maybe training related, maybe small arms involved, maybe. Maybe means nothing to me, Evelyn said. Vitals do. He swallowed, right. Dr. Naomi Reeves strode in a moment later, already gloved hair pulled back so tight it sharpened the bones in her face. You take primary nursing. I already did, Evelyn answered. Reeves glanced once at the setup, once at Evelyn, and almost smiled. Good. For half a second before the arrival, the room held that peculiar stillness only trauma workers understood. The pause before impact. Machines ready, people in position. Breath drawn in and kept. Beyond the doors, the storm pressed itself against the glass. Then the doors burst open. The gurney came in fast, pushed by men who looked less like ordinary medics and more like they had been dragged out of another world and ordered to keep moving. Rainwater dripped from tactical boots onto the tile. One man had blood on both forearms up to the elbow. Another wore a communication headset with one side torn loose. The smell hit first. Wet canvas, sweat, burned fabric, copper, sea. The patient on the stretcher was large and broad-shouldered, his skin drawn tight with pain beneath streaks of blood and grime. His tactical shirt had been cut once already in the field and packed hard over the lower abdomen. The right side of his chest showed ragged burn patterns from fragmentation. His face was cut along the cheekbone. His eyes were closed. 38-year-old male, the lead medic snapped. Gunshot, lower left abdomen. Secondary fragmentation, right thorax. Hypotensive in transport. 2 episodes, reduced consciousness. No documented allergies. No current meds disclosed, Name Reeves said. A beat passed. Then, from the foot of the gurney, one of the men answered. Commander Marcus Vance. The name landed differently than the report had. Less like paperwork, more like warning. Evelyn stepped forward. Transfer on my count, 1, 2, 3. They moved him onto the trauma bed. Wet gear hit the floor. Somebody called for blood. Somebody else got another line open. Reeves cut through the shredded shirt with quick, practiced hands. Evelyn leaned over the patient and placed a steady hand near his shoulder. Commander Vance, can you hear me? His eyelids flickered, then opened. She had spent enough years around the badly injured to know the difference between the vacant stare of shock and the focused gaze of a person fighting to stay present. Marcus Vance looked at her with immediate recognition, sharp and deliberate, as if he had found the one face he had crossed hell to reach. For the first time all night something moved under Evelyn's calm. Not panic, not yet. Just the unmistakable feeling that the room had shifted 1 degree off its axis, and everyone in it was about to start paying the price. Marcus Vance did not look at Dr. Reeves. He did not look at the corpsman trying to stabilize the dressing at his abdomen, or at the medic reaching for the edge of the monitor lead. He looked only at Evelyn, and with such exact certainty that for one disorienting second she had the absurd thought that perhaps she knew him after all and had merely forgotten from where. Then he moved. It should not have been possible in his condition. He was pale under the blood, his pressure already dropping, his breath clipped and shallow from the trauma to the right chest. But pain and blood loss did not erase training. They only made it uglier. With a violent effort, he shoved against the mattress and dragged himself halfway upright. Absolutely not, Reeves snapped. Stay flat. The room surged toward him at once, hands moving to force him back, but he was faster than the injury had any right to let him be. He raised his hand, his wrist trembling from strain, and saluted Evelyn. The gesture was not clumsy, not delirious, not random. It was precise, formal, clean all the way through the line of the wrist. The trauma bay went silent. It lasted only a heartbeat yet in a room built on alarms, and shouted numbers that felt longer than some funerals. The resident holding the ultrasound probe froze in place. One of the medics at the foot of the bed muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer stripped down to profanity. Logan Mercer, the broad-shouldered senior chief who had come in with the team, did not move at all. He watched the moment land as if he had expected trouble, just not this exact shape of it. Evelyn felt every eye in the room touch her at once. Vance's arm wavered, then dropped. Pain cut across his face hard enough to hollow it. He grabbed for purchase and caught Evelyn by the wrist before anyone could block him. His grip was burning hot and impossibly strong. Commander Reeves barked, "Let go of my nurse." But Vance was already pulling Evelyn downward, not enough to hurt, just enough to bring her close to his mouth. He whispered 2 words, "Lantern Cove." The floor seemed to vanish under her for half a second. No one in California should know that phrase. No one in this room. No one alive outside her family. Lantern Cove was what her father used to call the old marina outside Savannah when she was little. Not its real name. His name for it. Private and affectionate, spoken over a steering wheel before dawn, while coffee steamed in a paper cup between his knees, and the Atlantic still looked black enough to hide anything. She had not heard those words since before the day the Navy told them Daniel Shaw was gone. Her hand nearly slipped on the blood pressure cuff tubing. "Pressure is 86/48, she said, because work was the only language she trusted. "I need the blood up now." Reeves pried at Vance's fingers. "Let go." He did, but slowly and without taking his eyes off Evelyn's face. The room snapped back into motion. People moved again. The resident with the ultrasound hurried into place. Another nurse pushed the cooler in from blood bank. Logan Mercer stepped back toward the door, his expression unreadable, though the line at his jaw said he had clocked every second of what had just happened. Evelyn forced herself to breathe through her nose. One breath, then another. She reached for trauma shears and cut through the soaked remains of Vance's shirt while Reeves pressed at the flank wound. "Portable chest now," Reeves said. "I want another line, and I want it fast. He crashes. I need blood in him before he thinks about it." "Yes, doctor." The words came from 3 people at once. Evelyn cut higher along the right shoulder, and that was when she saw it. At first, she thought it was a faded unit marking, or an old tattoo blurred by time and sweat. Then the geometry sharpened under the bright trauma lights. A thin outer ring. A dark center point. Fine radiating lines like a damaged compass barely visible against darker skin and old scar tissue. The symbol from the envelope. Her gloved fingers stopped. Reeves looked up immediately. "Evelyn." She forced the shears to move again. "I'm fine." It was a lie and not a particularly convincing one. Reeves knew it. So did Vance. His gaze flicked toward his own shoulder for a fraction of a second, then back to her face as if he understood exactly what she had just recognized and had been waiting for it. 2 men appeared in the doorway then, and the room changed shape a second time. They were not hospital administration, not military police. Their suits were too good for both, and their stillness felt practiced in the wrong way. The older of the 2 carried himself with the easy authority of someone used to walking into restricted spaces and expecting everybody inside to move one step to accommodate him. He held up credentials for the unit clerk, barely slowing long enough for the gesture to become legal, then stepped inside. "Federal oversight," he said. "Commander Vance is under restricted authority. I need all non-essential personnel cleared." Reeves did not glance up. "Then I need federal oversight to learn basic trauma math. Everybody in this room is essential until I say otherwise." His eyes moved across the bay and landed on Evelyn. "Name," Busy Reeves said. The man ignored her. "Nurse, your name." Evelyn met his gaze over Vance's chest wound. Evelyn Shaw. Something nearly invisible passed through his face. Not surprise exactly. Recognition trimmed down so hard it barely showed. He stepped closer. "Agent Nolan Greer." Step away from the patient. "Number." The answer came from Vance, rough and immediate. A beat later, Evelyn said, "I'm not stepping away from an unstable trauma patient because someone arrived dressed for a hearing." The resident on her left went very still. Logan Mercer's mouth shifted at one corner, not quite a smile, not remotely amusement. Greer kept his expression smooth. That was not a request. Evelyn adjusted the line in Vance's arm and taped it down with steady fingers. "Then you should have chosen different words." For a second there were 2 emergencies in the room, one on the bed, one standing beside it. Then Vance made a low sound in his throat, and the numbers on the monitor dipped again. Reeves leaned in all attention back on the wound. Pressure's softer. Blood now. Evelyn, keep him with us. That was the mercy of medicine. The body made demands big enough to postpone nearly everything else. Evelyn hung the blood and squeezed the chamber, letting procedure drag her back into sequence. Vance's skin was hot under her hand fever or field heat, or the beginning of something worse. He turned his face toward her while Reeves worked at his side. "You came," he said. The words were almost lost under the hiss of oxygen. Evelyn kept her voice level. "You're in no condition to be cryptic. Never were." She looked at him sharply. That was not the kind of answer a delirious stranger gave. It carried familiarity without invitation, like a door opening into a room she had not known existed. Greer took another step toward the bed. "Commander, you will conserve your strength." Vance ignored him completely. His eyes dropped to Evelyn's left wrist, where the glove had slipped just enough to expose the pale crescent scar near the bone. "You still have it," he murmured. The room narrowed. The scar came from rusted vineyard wire in a thunderstorm when she was 9. Her father had wrapped it with his own shirt and carried her back through mud while she cried into his shoulder, and he kept telling her no story worth keeping came without one scar. Evelyn had never told anyone that. Not in Georgia, not in California, not ever. Reeves looked between them now, assessing not asking yet. Evelyn leaned closer, as if checking pupil response, and spoke without moving anything but her mouth. "Who are you?" Vance swallowed hard. Pain passed over his face like shadow over water. "I'm the man your father trusted." The sentence landed so hard she almost forgot to breathe. Greer moved at once. "That is enough." Reeves rounded on him with such open contempt it nearly lit the room. "You do not get to decide what is enough inside my trauma bay." Greer's voice cooled. "Doctor, you are treating a patient attached to matters well beyond this facility." Reeves straightened just enough to give him her full attention. "You are standing between me and hemorrhage control with polished shoes and a bad sense of timing. Move." Nobody in the room moved at all. Not for a second. Then the monitor tone changed again sharp with warning, and the moment fractured under necessity. More fluid. Another pressure check, portable chest imaging. The resident nearly dropped the gel bottle and recovered it at the last second. Evelyn worked because work kept her from letting the world split open in public. She cut away the last strips of soaked tactical fabric. She counted supplies without looking. She listened to Reeves' call for a chest series and mentally built the charting she would enter if this were in fact only a trauma case and not a hand reaching out of the grave. When the immediate crush eased just enough, she moved to collect what remained of Vance's gear according to protocol. Wet tactical vest, comms lead, damaged shirt, chain from his neck. One of the metal tags hanging beneath the torn collar was standard issue and still warm from his skin. She drew it clear, bagged it, and reached again to free the rest of the chain where it had snagged in the vest lining. Something else slipped loose against her palm. Smaller, older, heavier than it should have been. No one saw it but her. Reeves was focused on the wound. Greer was speaking in a low voice into a phone near the doorway. Mercer stood with his back against the wall, arms loose at his sides, looking like a man who could become violent in less time than it took most people to notice. The resident was trying very hard not to fail publicly. Evelyn closed her fingers over the metal by pure reflex and tucked her hand beneath the drape. For one dangerous beat, the room receded. She moved toward the supply alcove just outside the bay with a box of gauze in the crook of her arm to give the exit a professional shape. The door swung halfway shut behind her. Bright shelves, alcohol smell, the thin electrical hum of old fluorescent light. Only then did she open her hand. The tag lay across her glove, worn nearly smooth with age. Daniel Shaw, her father's name. There was no room in the alcove big enough for the force of that fact. Her vision pinched around the edges. She turned the tag over and read the line stamped across the back through scratches and old tarnish. Last active verification. 4 years ago. Not 19 years, 4. She stared until the letters blurred, then sharpened again. Beyond the half-open door, the hospital kept making ordinary noises. Wheels over thresholds. A call light somewhere down the hall. Reeves's voice clipping through an order. The world did not even slow to acknowledge what had just broken apart. Evelyn curled her fingers around the tag until the edges pressed through the glove, then slid it into the inner pocket of her scrub top behind her badge. Her hands were steady now. That frightened her more than shaking would have. When she stepped back into Trauma 1, Greer looked at her immediately. "Where were you?" "Getting what your patient needed to stay alive." "He is not my patient," Greer said. Evelyn set the gauze down. "Then stop answering for him." Reeves, without looking up, said, "I second that." A flush touched the resident's neck. Mercer coughed into one fist and pretended it meant nothing. Evelyn moved back to Vance's side and checked the line in his arm. Up close, he looked worse. The force holding him conscious had thinned to something ragged, but his eyes remained clear. Too clear for the amount of blood on the sheets. "Commander Vance," she said quietly, "look at me." He did. "Do you know where you are?" "Harbor Line." "Do you know your name?" "Marcus Vance." "Do you know what happens if you say one more thing that doesn't make sense?" A flicker passed through his face. Not humor. Appreciation of pressure meeting pressure. "You stop pretending." She cut away one more strip of fabric at his side. "I'm not pretending anything." His gaze moved to her chest pocket and back up again. It was almost imperceptible, but it told her enough. He knew exactly what had come loose from the vest. Whether he had meant her to find it or merely counted on the possibility, she could not tell. The portable imaging tech appeared at the threshold with the machine, and the expression of someone who understood better than to ask why a routine trauma looked like the edge of a federal incident. "Where do you want me?" "There," Reeves said, pointing. "And if you kink my line, I will mention you by name in all my nightmares." The tech swallowed and moved. The bay rearranged itself around the machine. Cords lifted, rails adjusted. Evelyn shifted left to give space, and Vance's fingers brushed the inside of her palm. Something stiff met the glove. She did not look down. She simply curled her hand naturally beneath the sheet and found a narrow folded strip, thin and waterproof like field note stock. His pulse fluttered against her wrist as he let it go. Mercer saw that too. This time he looked directly at her and gave the smallest incline of his head, not permission, not instruction, only acknowledgement. Whatever this was, it extended beyond Vance, beyond the wound, beyond the room. Evelyn slid the strip into the same inner pocket as the tag. Greer's attention snapped toward them. What was that? Evelyn did not turn. A patient trying not to die. His eyes stayed on her a moment longer. Then the chest image was up. Reeves was cursing softly at the right side fragment pattern, and the room dropped back into motion once more. By the time Vance's vitals stabilized into something temporarily survivable, the trauma bay had thinned. The extra medics were out. The imaging tech had left. Reeves stepped into the hall to speak to radiology. Greer remained near the door with one hand in his coat pocket, listening to silence the way some men listened to confessions. Mercer had shifted closer to the wall, but not farther from Vance. He was the kind of man who could look still while measuring all exits. Evelyn used the opening. "I need saline flushes," she said to no one in particular. "You already have them," Greer replied. She met his gaze. "Then I need 10 seconds without your commentary." Before he could answer, she stepped into the narrow charting alcove opposite the trauma room and pulled the half-door shut. Her hands moved fast now. The field strip unfolded into coordinates written in compressed block strokes. Beneath them, a location, Point Loma Light. At first, it meant nothing beyond geography. Then the rest of the notation came into focus. A time code. An old column shorthand she knew only because her father used to turn simple things into games when she was a child. Tide charts and marina maps and weather patterns translated into tiny puzzles at the kitchen table. And beneath that, a date. The day Ruth Shaw died. No obituary had run except the funeral notice. No public record anyone ordinary would have noticed. The knowledge of that date did not belong to strangers. The final shorthand line took her a second longer to translate. Hold until change of watch. Her knees nearly gave. Evelyn braced one hand against the counter and stared at the writing until the letters seemed to pulse. In the dark monitor screen above the workstation, her reflection looked like a woman who had walked into a night shift and been handed evidence that every grief she had ever arranged into order was counterfeit. She folded the strip again and tucked it away. When she returned to the bay, Greer was waiting just inside the doorway. "Anything else turn up?" His voice was mild enough to be dangerous. Evelyn kept hers flat. Fragments. Blood loss. A room full of people making treatment harder. Greer studied her face, then lowered his voice. "Commander Vance is compromised by field conditions. Men in pain often reach for familiar words and invent relationships. It would be best if you understood that. He knew my father's code phrase. He saw your badge. My badge does not say Lantern Cove." Silence sharpened between them. Through the glass behind him, Reeves was speaking to a resident while reviewing images. Mercer stood exactly where he had been, but his eyes were on Greer now. Vance lay still, though the stillness did not look like surrender. It looked like listening through pain. Greer said, "There are things attached to this patient that you do not understand." Then explain why he knows details about my father that should not exist. His expression changed by less than a degree, but she saw it. A tightening behind the eyes. Recalculation. Men like him were dangerous partly because they believed control looked like composure. They forgot that nurses made careers out of reading what other people missed in faces at 3 a.m. "Your father's case is closed," he said. Evelyn heard how careful the sentence was. "No," she said. "Apparently it was buried." That touched something harder under his calm. "You need to be very careful." She gave him the look she reserved for people who mistook warning for authority. "I have been careful for 20 years. The answer hung there too personal to have been planned. Greer stepped aside. Evelyn went back to the bedside. Vance's eyes opened when her shadow crossed him. "You need pain control." "I need minutes." "You're getting medication." She pushed it slowly into the line. His face tightened, then eased by degrees. Up close, his exhaustion looked almost violent, as if he were holding himself to the surface by discipline alone. "You still have room to lie to me," she said softly. "I want to know how much." His voice scraped. "Enough to keep you standing." "That is not an answer. It is the one your father would choose." Her hand paused over the tubing. Reeves came back in at that moment, chart in hand, irritation sharpening her features. "If anyone is using my patient's near-death experience as a committee meeting, I charge by the quarter hour." No one answered. She looked first at Vance, then at Greer, then at Evelyn. Her gaze lingered there longest. Reeves was not sentimental, but she was observant enough to know when a room had developed a second emergency under the visible one. "Evelyn," she said, "with me." The medication room across the hall was barely large enough for 2 people and a locked cabinet. Alcohol prep plastic bins humming refrigeration. Reeves shut the door behind them and folded her arms. "I'm asking this once," she said. "Are you in danger?" Evelyn looked at the labels on the bins instead of at her. Epinephrine, lidocaine, midazolam. Simple names for problems that knew how to declare themselves. After a moment, Reeves nodded. "Fine. Different question. Is the danger attached to him or to you?" Evelyn let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "I don't know where the line is anymore. That means there is one." "Yes?" Reeves watched her for another beat, then said more quietly, "The man in the coat is not here because of routine protocol. I know arrogance when I see it, and he has the polished kind. If you need me to stand in front of something ugly, do not wait until it gets clever." For one brief second, tired gratitude moved through Evelyn so fast it barely had shape. "I don't know what to tell you yet." "Then tell me when you do." Reeves opened the door. The conversation was over because that was all the room could safely hold. Back in the corridor, Tessa caught Evelyn by the elbow near the printer. There are now 2 more men pretending to read visitor policy signs at the nurses' station. Evelyn did not look over. Are they convincing? Not unless the policy suddenly started requiring earpieces. Thank you. Tessa read the strain in her face and lowered her voice. Whatever this is, you look like somebody handed you a patient and a secret at the same time. Evelyn nearly smiled. Then I must look busy. You look haunted. That too. She took the printed labels and returned to Trauma 1. This time, Logan Mercer was alone in the room with Vance. Reeves had been pulled into another bay. Greer was out of sight, which did not mean gone. It meant moving. Mercer straightened when she entered. You're Mercer. Senior Chief Logan Mercer, he said. How long before the suits come back? He glanced once toward the glass, then to Vance. Less than you need. Evelyn set the labels down. Then help me use it. Mercer moved to the doorway and placed himself there with the casual authority of a man who did not need to announce that he could hold it. Evelyn stepped to the bedside. Vance looked worse again. Pain medication had taken the edge off the tension in his face, but not enough to soften him into anything vulnerable. Fever brightened his skin. Blood moved dark through the tubing. His breathing hitched every few seconds on the right side, where the fragmentation had torn through muscle. Ask it, he said. No preamble, no mercy. Evelyn leaned close enough that her voice would not carry. Is my father alive? Vance looked straight into her eyes. Yes. No hesitation, no flourish. The answer did not spin the room. It made it utterly still. Evelyn felt every part of her body become acutely aware of itself at once. The pulse in her neck, the hidden weight of the dog tag in her pocket, the burn of fatigue under her eyes, the old scar on her wrist. 19 years of grief rearranging themselves in one blunt syllable. How she asked, and the word barely made it out. Taken, Vance said. Moved, kept off paper, not dead. By who? His breathing roughened. Some of the same men who wrote the report. Evelyn gripped the bed rail hard enough for the metal to bite through the glove. You expect me to accept that because you bled on my floor and knew one phrase from my childhood. No. His gaze dropped briefly to his own shoulder, then returned to her. I expect you to remember the symbol. She said nothing. Mercer still stood at the door, all listening now. Vance went on, each sentence costing him more. Breakwater. It started clean. Maritime intelligence relay outside compromised channels. Small, quiet, useful. Then men with money and access realized a hidden network could serve them better in the dark than in the light. The word seemed to settle into the room with the weight of something long buried. Your father was one of them, Evelyn asked. Yes. The answer opened more questions than it closed. She could feel them rising in her like floodwater. Her father, who taught her how to read tide tables and change a tire before she had a learner's permit. Her father, who packed orange slices in a cooler and hummed tunelessly while fixing anything with moving parts. Her father, who had apparently belonged to something that did not officially exist. Before she could speak again, footsteps sounded in the corridor. Mercer's head turned sharply. Greer was coming back. Vance saw it in her face before she moved. He lifted his hand an inch off the sheet, shaking with effort, and caught 2 fingers of hers between his. Do not give him anything. The contact lasted less than a second. Then he let go. Greer entered with both calm and impatience restored across his face. We're done with side conversations. Reeves came in almost on his heels, chart under one arm, and anger already loaded. Then stop causing them. Greer ignored her and addressed Evelyn directly. If Commander Vance gave you anything, you will turn it over. The dog tag felt heavy as stone against her chest. The folded note felt worse. Evelyn held his gaze and said clear as a monitor tone in a silent room. He gave me nothing. The lie entered the room and stayed there. No one challenged it. Not Reeves, not Mercer, not Vance. Greer studied her for a long moment, reading for disturbance for the smallest betrayal in the face of a woman he had already underestimated once. Evelyn gave him only a nurse's exhaustion and a nurse's patience. He said almost gently, You are tired, Ms. Shaw. This is the point where confusion becomes obstruction. She answered in the same calm voice she used on drunks, bullies, and panicked families. Then stop obstructing treatment. Somewhere just beyond the glass, another patient cried out down the hall and was soothed in a language Evelyn did not recognize. Hospital noise pressed in at the edges. Ordinary life still going on under fluorescent light while one room held a conspiracy, a ghost, and a daughter trying not to come apart in public. Greer took one more look at her pocket, then at Vance, then turned slightly toward Reeves. This patient will be transferred under federal authority. Reeves' face did not move. This patient is hypotensive, febrile, and still bleeding into my sheets. He goes nowhere I cannot justify in writing. Doctor, that is no longer your decision. Reeves stepped closer just enough that the room felt smaller. It became my decision the second he crossed my threshold. Mercer's shoulders eased by less than an inch. Vance watched all of them through pain and fever, saying nothing now because the room had reached the point where every word cost too much. Greer looked back to Evelyn one last time. Do not leave the floor. It was not a request. It was not exactly an order either. It was the shape of a cage being described by a man who assumed she had not noticed the bars yet. He left. The door swung once on its hinge and settled. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Reeves exhaled through her nose. If somebody would like to explain why my trauma room now feels like the waiting area for a classified disaster now would be charming. Evelyn checked the IV line because her hands needed a task. He needs another lab draw. That is not what I asked. It is the answer I can defend at the moment. Reeves looked at her a long time, then did something Evelyn had not expected. She let it stand. Fine, Reeves said. Then defend him long enough for me to keep him breathing. Evelyn nodded once. She moved back to the bedside and leaned close enough that only Vance could hear her. I lied for you. His eyes opened fully. No, he said, you lied for him. For the first time since the phrase Lantern Cove had reached across 19 years and found her in a trauma bay, Evelyn did not try to deny the truth of anything. She only held his gaze and said so quietly it barely disturbed the air between them. Then you're going to start with one answer and no riddles. Vance said nothing. Her next words were sharper, simpler, stripped to the bone. Is my father alive because they need something from him? She asked. Or because he still has something they're afraid of? Vance's expression changed not with surprise, but with the recognition that she had finally asked the right question. And this time, when he drew breath to answer, the whole room seemed to lean toward him without moving at all. Marcus Vance closed his eyes for one beat as pain moved through him in a slow, hard wave. When he opened them again, whatever reserve he had been using to ration truth looked thinner than before. Fever brightened his skin. Blood still moved through the tubing at his side in dark, deliberate lines. The monitor kept up its indifferent pulse as if the body on the bed were still only a body, and not the center of a story that had just reached into Evelyn's life with both hands. They are afraid, he said, voice roughened to almost nothing, because your father never lost what mattered. Evelyn did not blink. What is it? Vance's gaze held hers, the tide ledger. The phrase sat in the room with the weight of an object and the shape of a secret. Reeves at the counter behind them looked up sharply. I do not need details to keep him alive, she said. But if those details are the reason men in suits keep trying to claim my floor, I reserve the right to hate them accurately. Mercer's mouth shifted at one corner. It disappeared before it could become anything as soft as amusement. Evelyn leaned one hand against the bed rail and kept her voice low. What is the tide ledger? Vance swallowed, then spoke in pieces, each one measured against the effort it cost. Not one book, not one file, a distributed record, payment routes, shell contractors, false procurement chains, detention transfers, maritime extractions. Authorizations signed through enough layers to make every order look clean by the time it touched daylight. Evelyn heard the words. Understanding them took longer. Her father had been a Navy man. That was the version of him she had carried for 19 years. Disciplined, reserved, good with boats and weather and engines, the man who checked tire pressure before road trips and sharpened kitchen knives on Sunday afternoons at the back steps. The man who taught her how to read a tide chart before she knew what espionage meant. Nothing in that memory had prepared her for the idea of hidden records shell contractors or off-book detentions written into a map of corruption called a ledger. You're telling me my father found proof of something this big and they kept him alive for almost 2 decades? Because they never got all of it, Vance said. The answer came fast enough to sound like truth and tired enough to sound expensive. Your father knew better than to keep that kind of weight in one place. He broke it apart before they reached him. Routes, keys, confirmation points, fragments only certain hands could reconnect. He made the ledger hard to destroy because he made it impossible to see all at once. Reeves stripped off one pair of gloves and pulled on another. People with normal hobbies are always a gift, she muttered. Evelyn did not look away from Vance. And breakwater. Vance let out a breath that might once have been a laugh in another life. Breakwater started as a solution. Small maritime intelligence relay, unofficial by design, built to move sensitive information when the official channels were already compromised, too slow or too visible. It worked because it stayed quiet, and because the men who built it still believed secrecy could protect something other than themselves. He paused. The monitor skipped a fraction faster. Evelyn reached down and steadied the line taped along his forearm, a small ordinary motion inside a sentence that had broken open the architecture of her past. My father helped build it, she said. Yes, the word hit harder the second time than it had the first. And then what? Vance's eyes shifted briefly toward the glass where movement passed in the corridor, blurred by reflection and fluorescent glare. When he spoke again, his voice had gone flatter, as if he were turning memory into report to keep the pain from owning it. Then, men higher up realized what breakwater could become if nobody outside it knew how it worked. A clean network can move intelligence. A dirty one can move anything: money, people, names, accountability. Once the wrong people understood that the mission split. One side wanted evidence preserved in case the system could still be forced to correct itself. One side wanted leverage. One side wanted silence. And Daniel Shaw wanted what? Vance looked at her with the sort of directness that made lying feel childish. He wanted the truth to survive him. The sentence slid under her ribs with surgical precision. Mercer shifted near the door, not restless, just listening harder now. Reeves was pretending not to listen at all, which in a surgeon meant she was absorbing every useful contour while refusing to dignify the rest with commentary. Evelyn's throat tightened, but her voice stayed controlled. So they tried to bury him with the report. They made him officially dead, Vance said. That gave them 2 advantages. No public questions if he disappeared into holding. No legal path for a wife or daughter to keep digging once the body was declared lost at sea. A strange pressure moved through Evelyn. Then not quite anger, because anger was too narrow, not grief, because grief had already worn one shape for too long. Something colder. The realization that official language had not merely lied to her family. It had been engineered to exhaust them into obedience. My mother knew, she said. It was not a question, not really. Vance's face changed by a degree, enough to confirm the answer before he spoke it. She knew enough to be dangerous, not enough to destroy herself quickly. Evelyn looked down at the sheet for 1 second because the room had become too bright. For years, she had understood Ruth Shaw through the blunt vocabulary available to daughters of difficult grief. Widowed, lonely, private, then later forgetful, fragile failing. She had measured her mother's late life through decline because decline was easier to bear than strategy. Easier than admitting Ruth had perhaps spent years hiding not from sorrow, but from men who watched for patterns and waited for mistakes. What did she know? Did she know, Evelyn asked. Vance's answer came slowly. Your father built contingencies before they took him. Dead channels, delayed signals, Ordinary objects used as markers because nobody steals a church cookbook or a stack of weather clippings unless they know what they're looking for. Ruth became keeper of partial roots. Not the whole ledger, never that. Authentication points, fragments. Enough to reopen a line if the right hand survived long enough to use it. The kitchen at midnight, the lights off. The weather notices folded into recipe books. Pencil marks erased to ghosts. Hymn numbers circled in church bulletins. The house full of habits Evelyn had filed under age and sadness. She wasn't unraveling, Evelyn said. Number. She was maintaining contact, as long as she could. The room remained full of machines, blood, and hard white light. Yet the world had tilted so far that Evelyn could see her mother in a new language. Ruth, at the kitchen sink with one hand on the counter, not because she was lost, but because the dark made observation easier. Ruth, keeping old paper not because she could not let go, but because some pages had become map pieces. Ruth, locking the door twice, because somebody might someday test the difference between grief and caution. The sorrow in that realization had texture. It burned differently than loss. She had mourned a woman she thought had faded. Now she had to mourn the strength inside the fading too. Reeves set a fresh dressing pack on the bed tray and said, not unkindly, "If anybody intends to keep detonating family history in this room, do me the courtesy of doing it between his blood pressure checks." Evelyn nodded without looking up. "He still has a rising fever." "Exactly," Reeves said. "I enjoy betrayal less when it competes with sepsis." Vance's mouth twitched. The effort nearly cost him. Pain folded through him and sharpened the line of his jaw. Evelyn moved in at once, checking the edge of the dressing where new blood had touched through near the lower flank. "You push too hard, I sedate you," she said. He opened one eye, threatening. Accurate. A quiet beat passed. Then she asked the question that had been building under the others from the moment he whispered Lantern Cove. "Where is my father?" Vance closed his eyes again, whether from pain or caution she could not tell. Mercer answered first, voice low from the doorway. "We don't have current sight confirmation." Evelyn looked up sharply. "You told me he's alive." Mercer met her gaze. "He was alive 3 weeks ago." The words entered her bloodstream like ice. Vance took over before she could speak. "He is alive now." "You sound certain for a man who just admitted you don't have current sight confirmation." "I am certain because the people holding him still need what they have never been able to extract cleanly," Vance said. "If they had broken him or rebuilt the ledger without him, we would know." The network chatter would have changed. Accounts would have cleared. The old routes would have started collapsing in patterns we haven't seen. "Patterns," Reeves said under her breath. "Everybody in this story needs either a lawyer or medication." Evelyn did not smile. 3 weeks ago. Start there. Vance's gaze shifted to Mercer, then back. Some conversation passed between them without language. Permission. Confirmation. Something more practice than trust, and more tired than rank. "We got word through one of the last living breakwater channels," Vance said. "A temporary transfer window. Short hold, limited coverage. The kind of movement they use when they think no one is watching, and everyone who once mattered is dead or compromised. We built a team fast. Small footprint, minimal trace. Get and confirm identity extract if the route stayed clean." Mercer's expression went harder around the eyes. Evelyn had seen that look on trauma family members before when a doctor asked them to describe the collision. Not fresh pain. Remembered impact. "And it didn't stay clean," she said. "Number. That single syllable contained gunfire weather and funerals without naming any of them. Somebody sold the route," Vance said. "We were hit before we cleared the perimeter. Not random, not local. Timed to our extraction corridor. They knew how long we'd have and where we'd lose speed." "How many of you?" Mercer answered this time. "Enough." Evelyn looked at him. He stood with arms loose, shoulders heavy, blood dried along one temple from some wound he had either forgotten or decided did not matter. There was nothing dramatic in the answer. That made it worse. "You got to him," she said. For 2 minutes, Vance replied. Everything in her went still. Vance kept his eyes on the ceiling while he spoke, as if he could tolerate the memory only by reducing her face from it. He was thinner, bruised, older in the ways captivity makes a man old and nowhere else. But it was him. He knew before we said it that the route was burned, knew from the sound pattern outside the structure and the delay in our fallback signal. We told him we had maybe one chance to push through. He said no. Evelyn stared. He refused extraction. He refused the route as it stood, Vance said. Said it was too visible once compromised. Said if they had exposed that line, they were waiting for the second and third. He gave us an alternate contingency instead. Me. Yes, the word landed with a force she could feel all the way down into old anger. My father was in a cell somewhere, and instead of trying to come home, he built another plan around me. Vance looked back at her then, and there was something in his face she had not seen before. Not pity. Respect sharpened by sorrow. He did not build it around you because you were expendable. He built it around you because he believed you were the only piece left outside their reach that could still hold. Her voice lowered. You do not know me well enough to say that. No, he said, he did. Silence pooled under the fluorescent lights. Evelyn thought of all the ways she had carried her father after his death. Not consciously, not in speech, but in the architecture of her choices. The way she trusted competence over charm. The way she drove with both hands at 10 and 2 on lonely roads because that was how he taught her. The way she learned to stay calm while other people bled. The way she mistook control for safety because losing both parents to forms and silence had taught her nothing else. And now here was a wounded man on a trauma bed telling her those pieces were not accidental. That Daniel Shaw from somewhere in the dark had expected his daughter to become exactly the kind of person who could receive a crisis and not collapse under it. She did not know whether to feel seen or used. Probably both. When did he plan the transfer, she asked. Vance's answer was careful. Not the transfer itself. He planned the possibility years ago. He kept a watch list of cities where civilian and naval systems crossed often enough to hide movement in the ordinary flow. He left dormant routes in place. When your mother died, one surviving contact made sure an opening appeared where you were most likely to step toward it without being told. San Diego, Harbor Line. The offer that arrived with suspicious speed after weeks of feeling like she could not breathe inside Georgia anymore. You're telling me my fresh start was a funnel. I'm telling you he built doors where he could and hoped grief would move you through one he could still reach. The cruelty of that struck her first, then the love inside it. Neither softened the other. Reeves moved to the side of the bed and checked the chest dressing herself. I would like the record to show that every answer somehow creates 3 new offenses against my patients. Dr. Mercer said we appreciate your patience. No, you appreciate my trauma certification. Patience is not currently an inventory. Yet she stayed. Yet she kept checking the line, the pressure, the breath sounds. Whatever else Naomi Reeves was, she did not retreat from trouble once she recognized the shape of need. Evelyn looked at Vance again. The note. Point Loma Light. The date on it. My mother's death. Explain that. Vance exhaled slowly. Your mother's death activated an old condition. One of the dead channels she held had a release tied to obituary monitoring and county records. Not enough to expose the route automatically. Enough to tell the surviving network that the last civilian custodian of a certain set of fragments was gone and the line had to shift to the next name. Mine. Yes, and Point Loma. Authentication, he said. Your father never trusted any route that moved from recognition straight to extraction. Too easy to fake. Too easy to coerce. The lighthouse is a proof point, not an answer. Not him. A place where one piece verifies the next. What piece? A cache. Documents, maybe a key. Maybe a phrase only your mother would have known how to confirm once, and you can confirm now. Evelyn frowned. I don't know anything about any lighthouse. No, but you know your mother. The certainty in the sentence made her almost angry. She died before telling me anything useful. Vance did not flinch. She told you more than you understood at the time. That struck like accusation, though she knew he did not mean it that way. Memory rose without permission. Ruth in the kitchen one August night years earlier, standing at the stove while rain tapped the window over the sink. Evelyn had been angry about something small and adolescent, furious at some betrayal that barely qualified as one. She had demanded to know why people never simply said what they meant. Ruth had kept stirring the pot and said, without turning around, "Some truths do not arrive when we are ready. They arrive when they run out of places to hide." At 16, Evelyn had rolled her eyes and slammed a cabinet door. Now the sentence came back with an edge she had not heard then. Another memory followed. Her mother sorting old recipe cards at the table, pausing too long over one marked lemon pie. "Your father always said you should trust the thing nobody notices twice," Ruth had murmured. Evelyn had thought she meant ingredients. She felt suddenly acutely how much of her mother's life she had mistaken for harmless oddity, simply because the truth was too strange to fit into an ordinary daughter's understanding. She had me memorizing things Evelyn said quietly more to herself than the room. Not intentionally, at least I didn't think so. Hymn numbers, old radio call signs from weather bulletins. The names she used for places that weren't the names on maps. Vance watched her through fatigue. That was not an accident. No, she said, apparently not. Mercer's attention shifted toward the hall. Beyond the glass, one of the suited men reappeared at the nurse's station and then vanished again. Surveillance by posture. Pressure by presence. Evelyn noticed the movement too. How much does Greer know? Vance's eyes hardened a fraction despite the exhaustion. Enough to be dangerous. Not enough to sleep easy. Who is he? Federal liaison on paper. Containment and asset recovery in practice. He works for people who inherited the dirtiest half of breakwater when it split and turned it into a machine. A machine for what? Maintaining leverage. Protecting buried operations. Cleaning exposure before it reaches daylight. You talk like breakwater became a private country. In some rooms, Vance said that is exactly what it was. Reeves gave a humorless breath. Wonderful. My patient has a bullet wound, a fever, and membership in a secret nation I cannot bill. Evelyn looked toward the door where Mercer remained still as stone. Why bring him here? Why not to military medicine? Why not somewhere your people control? Mercer answered this time. Because the routes we control are the first ones Greer watches. Because he expected us to run military. Because Harbor Line was the one place we could hide him inside something louder than his own operation. And because of me. Yes, Vance said. The honesty of it irritated her more than a softer answer would have. You had no right. No, he agreed. The directness of that pulled her up short. I had orders from a dying plan and a narrowing window, he said. Rights were not part of the inventory. Evelyn stared at him. He lay there, burned, bleeding fever rising, and still managed to make the truth sound stripped enough to cut with. Did my mother know he was alive? She asked. Vance took longer to answer that one. She knew he had not died the way they said. She received confirmation once, years ago, through a route that collapsed afterward. After that, only indirect signal. Nothing she could use to bring him home. Enough to keep hope alive. Not enough to make it kind. That hurt in a new place. Ruth Shaw had gone to her grave, carrying not certainty, not closure, but a suspended truth. Her husband, not dead, not reachable, not safe. A hope too large to surrender and too fragile to speak aloud. Evelyn thought of the way Ruth sometimes looked toward the driveway when a car slowed outside. The way she had once asked in the middle of a church lunch years ago what time the tide turned on a Wednesday in September, no one had mentioned. The way her fingers would rest on the kitchen counter at night as if counting something invisible. Evelyn had called it memory slipping. Maybe it had been, But memory had not been the only thing at work. She was alone with it, Evelyn said. Mercer's face tightened. Yes, that yes held guilt inside it. Not his alone. The networks, the world's. Everybody who knew enough to respect Ruth's burden and not enough to take it from her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Vance said quietly, "She kept the line alive longer than anyone expected." Evelyn looked at him. Something in his expression had softened all the way into respect. Not for her this time. For Ruth. She was under observation for years, he went on. Private contractors, federal cutouts. Local tails rotated often enough to avoid pattern. They waited for her to move wrong. She almost never did. The idea nearly took Evelyn's breath. My mother was watched, yes, for 19 years. Not always at the same intensity, but yes. And there it was. The final cruelty. Ruth had not simply lived with private grief. She had lived under a long, low-pressure field of scrutiny carrying fragments of a vanished man's war inside church cookbooks and kitchen habits, while the state or something adjacent to it kept one eye on her mailbox and another on her mistakes. Evelyn pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose and willed the room not to blur. She had spent years feeling guilty for her impatience with Ruth's rituals, with the questions repeated and the locks checked and the odd hoarding of trivial paper. Now guilt reassembled into something sharper. Respect too late. Understanding too late. Love made suddenly heavier by the knowledge of how little she had actually seen. Reeves noticed the change in her posture immediately. "Sit if you need to. I'm fine." That answer is losing credibility. Evelyn let out one breath. "I know." Reeves came closer, lowering her voice just enough to make the privacy deliberate. "Then stop trying to survive this standing on pride. If you fall over in my bay, I will resent the paperwork." The comment was dry enough to save her from the humiliation of comfort. Evelyn looked at her and nodded once. It was all she could manage. Vance watched the exchange, then said, "Your father gave one last instruction." Evelyn's head turned back to him so fast the room might as well have disappeared. "What?" Vance's gaze held hers. "If you asked why he never came for you, he said to tell you that staying away was the last protection he had left." No one moved. There are sentences that do not sound large when spoken aloud. They enter the body small and then do their damage from inside. This was one of them. For 19 years, Evelyn had carried a child's rage inside a capable adult frame. Rage at the Navy. Rage at the sea. Rage at the obscene neatness of folded flags and practiced condolences. Buried under all of it, where she almost never allowed herself to look, had been another question simpler and crueler. "Why did you leave?" Now, the answer arrived not as comfort, but as a blade sharpened by love. He stayed away because her existence made him vulnerable, because her name could be used, because proximity was a trail, because every instinct that might have driven him back to his wife and child had become a weapon other men could use. Evelyn's hand found the bed rail again. The cold metal helped. Mercer looked away first. Reeves looked nowhere at all, which was its own form of mercy. After a long moment, Evelyn said very quietly, "That does not make him easier to forgive." No, Vance said. It was not meant to. The honesty of that saved the room from sentiment. She straightened by degrees. And now, right now, what do they want from him? Vance's voice dropped lower still. Where the final assembly path is. Which fragments remained with Ruth? Whether any of the old authentication points survived outside controlled custody. Whether the ledger can still be reconstructed in a form that reaches daylight. And can it? He looked at her chest pocket where the tag and folded strip rested hidden behind her badge. Yes. The word seemed to alter the air itself. Evelyn followed his gaze. Because of Point Loma. Because of Point Loma. Because of your mother's envelope. Because your father assumed eventually the network around him would fail, and only blood memory would remain clean enough to trust. She felt a wave of anger, then sudden and clean. Blood memory. That sounds poetic for a man who turned his family into a contingency. Vance did not defend Daniel Shaw. That was one of the first reasons she believed him. "It sounds unforgivable when you say it that way," he answered. Some days it was. Evelyn held his gaze, and some days it was the only thing he had left to give. Silence gathered again. Then the curtain at the room entrance shifted, and Tessa appeared half inside, half out, carrying a fresh bag of fluids with a face arranged into professional neutrality and eyes very much awake. "Sorry," she said. "I have what you asked for. Also, there are now 3 men in government haircuts pretending not to watch this room." Reeves held out a hand for the fluids. Add lack of subtlety to the chart. Tessa passed the bag over, then looked at Evelyn for a beat longer than was casual. "You okay?" "Number." Tessa accepted the answer at once. "Good. I was worried you'd say yes." She left without another word. Reeves changed the fluid over and checked the monitor herself. "He buys himself time if no one does anything reckless in the next 10 minutes, Mercer said quietly. "That may already be too optimistic." Reeves turned her head. "I would love to hear the reason." Mercer's eyes stayed on the corridor beyond the glass. "Because Greer won't keep waiting. He's deciding whether to close the floor or move the patient under his own authority." The room stilled again, but differently this time. Less revelation. More geometry. Doors, timing, force. Reeves set the empty bag aside. "He tries to move this patient without my clearance. I become extremely unpleasant." Vance looked at her. "Doctor, with respect you already are." Her eyes flashed. "And yet you continue to benefit from it." A weak ghost of humor passed through Mercer's face and vanished. Evelyn understood then, with a clarity that felt almost cruel. Part 4 of her life had ended the moment she found the tag. Whatever came now would not be about discovering whether the official story was false. That question had already been answered. The remaining question was whether truth could move faster than the machinery built to crush it. She took the old photograph and symbol page in her mind and laid them beside the note in her pocket. Lantern Cove, Point Loma Light, Breakwater, the Tide Ledger, Ruth at the kitchen window. Daniel alive somewhere because the people who held him were still afraid. "Why me?" she said again, but this time not to the room. To the logic of the whole terrible thing. If all he needed was blood memory, why not tell me anything before they took him? Why leave me with nothing but a funeral and a lie? Vance answered carefully. "Because information ages. People break. Children repeat things they do not understand. He thought distance would keep you ordinary enough to stay alive." The sentence hurt because it was almost tender. "Ordinary," Evelyn said. "That word is not doing much for me tonight." No, Vance agreed. Reeves crossed her arms. "I would like to file a formal complaint against every man in this story named Daniel or Nolan." Before anybody could answer, Greer appeared again at the glass. He did not enter immediately. He stood outside the room with one hand low against his coat and spoke to one of the suited men beside him. Calm, precise, not hurried. The sort of stillness that meant plans were being assembled rather than abandoned. Mercer's body changed first, not dramatically, just enough for a trained eye to see that he had gone from listening to ready. Reeves saw it too. "How bad?" Mercer looked at her. "Bad enough that waiting becomes a choice." Evelyn turned back to Vance. "If Greer gets you out of this room, I disappear. And if you stay, he closes every route around you until Point Loma means nothing." Reeves's gaze moved between them. "There it is." Evelyn straightened. "What?" "The part everyone keeps circling around because saying it out loud makes it real." Reeves' voice sharpened. "This patient cannot go through an ordinary transfer. He cannot stay where he is. And the man in the hallway intends to make both of those facts useful to him." Mercer nodded once, yes. Reeves looked at Evelyn then. Not as her nurse. Not as a subordinate. As the only person in the room who had not been trained for whatever hidden war this was and had still somehow become essential to it. "And you," Reeves said, "where are you in that equation?" The answer came before Evelyn fully assembled it. I'm the one he can't account for yet. Vance watched her with something like grim approval. That won't last. No, she said, probably not. Greer opened the door and stepped inside. The room cooled around him. Doctor, he said, addressing Reeves but looking at Evelyn. Arrangements are being made. Reeves did not move. That is a beautifully vague sentence. Commander Vance will be transferred under federal supervision to a secure facility. He will not. Greer's expression stayed mild. You are no longer in a position to decide that. Reeves looked at him as if he had just attempted a difficult word and failed. I am exactly in that position until my patient stops being unstable, or you produce a court order, and even then I reserve the right to be insulting. Bashi. Greer ignored the insult. Men like him always ignored what they could not control socially and attacked the structure instead. Miss Shaw, he said a moment. Evelyn did not step away from the bed, no. His eyes settled on her chest pocket, then returned to her face. You continue to place yourself very close to matters above your clearance. She heard the threat beneath the diction now without any effort at all. You continue to use the word clearance like it means morality. That touched something colder under his composure. Your father made a catastrophic miscalculation. Reeves' head turned. Mercer's jaw tightened. Vance's eyes opened fully. Greer had said it too quickly. Not if he had. Not if he once did. The present force of the sentence gave him away more cleanly than a confession would have. Evelyn took one slow step toward him. Then why are you still spending men and money trying to contain him? The silence that followed was thin enough to cut. Greer recovered first. Of course he did. You are tired, he said, and emotionally compromised. So are you, Evelyn answered. For the first time since entering the hospital, something like open irritation showed through the polish. It vanished almost at once, but not before she saw it. Not before Reeves saw it too. Reeves said cool as stainless steel Agent Greer. Unless you are here with medication imaging or legal authority, I can verify before sunrise. Remove yourself from my bay and stop trying to interrogate my staff. Greer looked at Vance then. Whatever passed across his face in that glance was not concern. It was calculation mixed with the annoyance of a man whose timeline had been disturbed. You are making this harder than it needs to be, he said. Vance's lips moved. Evelyn leaned close enough to hear. That means we still have options. Greer turned and left without another word. No one in the room spoke until the door shut behind him. Then Reeves exhaled through her nose and looked at Evelyn. I am done pretending this is a normal night. Mercer said we all are. Reeves faced him. Then speak plainly. If he leaves under Greer's control, he will not arrive where he is supposed to. Reeves' eyes narrowed. That is an exceptionally grim thing to say in a hospital. It is an exceptionally grim morning, Mercer replied. Evelyn felt the floor under her shoes as if for the first time in hours. The polished tile, the hard fluorescent light, the smell of antiseptic over blood. All of it heartbreakingly ordinary around the edges of a truth that was not. She reached into the inside pocket of her scrubs and pressed her fingers once against the old dog tag through the fabric. Daniel Shaw. Last active verification. 4 years ago. Not dead. Waiting. Still costing people sleep. Then she looked at Vance. If Point Loma is the first key, she said you need to live long enough to get me there. His gaze held hers, yes. The answer was almost swallowed by exhaustion now, but no less certain. Reeves followed the line of that exchange and came to a conclusion fast enough to change the room before she even spoke. I need 10 minutes, she said. Mercer looked at her carefully. For what? To decide how much of my career I am willing to mortgage against your disaster. There was no drama in the sentence. That made Evelyn trust it more. Reeves picked up the chart from the counter, scanned the latest vitals, and looked back at Evelyn. You, with me in the medication room, now. Evelyn glanced once at Vance. He gave the smallest nod she had ever seen. Not command, not permission. Just trust spent carefully. She followed Reeves out of the bay with the dog tag against her chest. The note at Point Loma folded over itself like a live wire, and the knowledge that her mother had died carrying a map no one had bothered to explain to the daughter now standing in the middle of it. The medication room smelled of alcohol prep, plastic wrappers, and stale air that never quite moved. It was barely big enough for 2 people, a locking cabinet, and the kind of truth that did not belong in a hospital before dawn. Reeves shut the door behind them and turned the small metal latch with one sharp motion. For a second she said nothing. She only looked at Evelyn the way trauma surgeons looked at scans they did not like and could not afford to misread. Then she asked, quiet and direct, "Are you in danger because of the man in that bed, or because of the man in the hallway?" Evelyn leaned one hand against the counter. Her legs were steady. Her pulse was not. "I think the honest answer is yes." That was not evasive, Reeves said. It was irritatingly efficient. Evelyn let out a breath through her nose. "If he goes with Greer, he disappears." Reeves studied her face. "You believe that?" "Yes, and if he stays here, Greer locks the floor down. He isolates him. He isolates me. He takes whatever room is left and closes it." Reeves folded her arms. How much of what he said is true? Evelyn looked at the labeled drawers instead of at her. Flushes, syringes, narcotics, clear names, clean systems, small mercies arranged in rows. Enough that I found my father's dog tag hidden in Vance's gear. She paused, then chose honesty, because the room had become too small for anything else. "My father was declared dead 19 years ago. The tag says he was active 4 years ago." Reeves did not speak. That was one of the things Evelyn liked most about her. Naomi Reeves did not fill silence with comfort when precision would do. "He knew things no stranger should know," Evelyn continued. "A code phrase from my childhood. A scar on my wrist. Details about my mother that line up with things I only understood tonight. I do not know all of it yet. I know enough." Reeves nodded once, and Greer. "He knows more than he should. Enough to be afraid. Enough to make mistakes when he talks." "Good." Reeves pushed off the counter. "Fear makes arrogant men sloppy." The answer surprised Evelyn. "That does not sound like a reason to help." "It is not." Reeves' eyes held hers. "This is, I have an unstable trauma patient with a bullet wound, a fever, a rising risk profile, and a federal operator trying to seize him without giving me a destination I can defend in writing. In my world, that is called a problem. I solve problems." Evelyn felt the tightness in her chest shift by a degree. Not relief. Something stronger and less sentimental than that. Alignment. "I need to know one thing before I step into traffic for you," Reeves said. "If I create room, do you know how to use it?" The answer came faster than thought. Yes. Reeves watched her a moment longer, then nodded again. "Good. Then stop looking like the floor just informed you of your own funeral." Despite everything, something almost like a smile pulled at the corner of Evelyn's mouth and failed. Reeves continued. "There is an emergency critical care transfer pathway under physician override. Legal, rare, ugly. It exists for exactly the kind of night when bed control becomes slower than blood loss and risk management is not physically present to be annoying." Evelyn straightened. "You can trigger it." "I can. The problem is that it flags the second the system catches up, which means whatever we do with it has to happen before men like Greer turn it into an argument instead of a move." Evelyn felt her mind click into the rhythm she knew best. Not grief now, not shock. Sequence. If you enter it as unstable trauma with active hemodynamic concern-rising fever and compromised treatment environment due to external interference, it can support immediate movement. She was already hearing the language as she said it, chart, clean, factual, built to survive review. But the receiving point cannot look invented. Reeves gave her a thin glance. "Please do not insult me by assuming I was planning amateur theater." It was not an insult. It sounded like one. It sounded like caution. That is the only reason I did not object more. The room held there for a beat, both women standing inside the sort of truss that was not warm, but held weight beautifully. Then Reeves said, "Can your people produce a transport team that looks enough like medicine to move through this hospital without starting a riot?" "My people," Evelyn repeated, and the phrase landed strangely. Reeves did not blink. Temporary phrasing, focus. Evelyn thought of Mercer at the doorway of Vance, bleeding through his discipline of Greer, measuring corridors with his eyes. Mercer will know. Then we ask him without saying anything, in a room with microphones, cameras, or polished shoes. Reeves opened the door. They stepped back into the corridor, and the noise of the floor rushed around them at once. A call bell 3 rooms down. Rolling cartwheels. A patient asking for water. A clerk on the phone with lab sounding more tired than polite. The ordinary machinery of hospital life continuing with humiliating indifference. Mercer was waiting just outside the bay posture, loose attention anything but. Reeves stopped in front of him. "Do you have access to a critical transport unit that can clear this hospital fast and look boring while doing it?" Mercer looked from her to Evelyn and back. He understood the question without asking for the pieces left out of it. "Yes." "How fast?" "If I call it in now, under 10 minutes. Medical presentation. No obvious weapons. No uniforms that shout patriotism at my charge nurse." Mercer's gaze sharpened by less than a degree. "That can be done." Reeves held his eyes. "If any line comes loose, or any of my staff ends up in a report because your version of subtlety is inadequate, I become your problem too." Mercer gave one short nod, understood. "Good." Reeves turned to Evelyn, "With me." They crossed to the nurse station. The monitor screens threw pale light over both of them as the night secretary swiveled back from a printer with a stack of labels in hand. "Dr. Bed Management wants to know if Trauma 1 is opening." "No," Reeves said. The secretary took in the expression on her face and wisely did not ask again. Evelyn slipped into the terminal beside Reeves and began building the transfer packet line by line. Her hands were steady now because they had something to do. She entered only what she could defend. Unstable adult trauma patient. Penetrating abdominal injury with thoracic fragmentation. Ongoing hypotension. Persistent fever of uncertain source, escalating compromise to care environment due to restricted non-clinical interference. Immediate physician override requested for critical transport under active attending authority. Reeves read as the order populated and signed each field the second it appeared. Her jaw was set hard enough to hurt just looking at it. "This will trip alarms the second someone upstairs notices," she said. Evelyn kept typing. "Not if we move before upstairs catches up." Reeves shot her a look. "You have done this before. Only when systems become slower than blood." Comforting. At the far end of the station, Tessa looked up from a med cart and took one glance at the screen. She came over carrying a packet of saline flushes she absolutely did not need to bring herself. "I am not asking questions," she said quietly. "That is one of your more attractive traits," Reeves replied. Tessa ignored her and looked at Evelyn. "Do you need coverage?" Evelyn met her eyes. Tessa had the kind of face that never learned how to fake indifference well. Concern sat plain in it. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I need the floor to keep sounding ordinary for as long as possible." Tessa nodded at once. "Then I can be ordinary at volume." "Perfect," Reeves said. "Start by finding me a reason to shout at someone in public. I need witnesses remembering medicine, not secrecy." Tessa's mouth twitched. "That I can do." She moved off with purposeful speed, and within 20 seconds was correcting a transport aide in a tone bright enough to carry. The argument was about linen bins. It sounded real because in hospitals most loudness did. Reeves finished the last signature and looked toward Trauma 1. "Once I trigger this fully, there is no clean way back." Evelyn touched the pocket under her badge for 1 second. Dog tag. Folded note. The weight of a father who had stopped being dead and become dangerous again. "I know." "No." Reeves's voice lowered. "You know professionally. That is not the same. If Greer wants leverage, he uses credentials first, then reputation, then fear. You are a civilian nurse in a hospital system that likes its people compliant and billable. Men like him count on that. Evelyn lifted her eyes. I am aware. Awareness is not the same as consent. For one brief instant, the fatigue in Reeves' face showed plain under the hardness. Not weakness. Cost. I am not doing this because I like mysteries, she said. I am doing it because too many people in this building still believe medicine belongs beneath power. It does not. Not while I am on shift. That settled something in Evelyn deeper than gratitude could have reached. Before she could answer, movement in the corridor drew both their attention. Greer had returned. He was alone this time, which made him more dangerous, not less. Witnesses diluted menace. Privacy refined it. He crossed the hall at a measured pace and stopped just outside the station, one hand low at his side, gaze moving first to the terminal, then to the chart in Reeves' hand, then to Evelyn. Doctor, he said. I was under the impression this patient was not moving. Reeves did not give him the courtesy of turning fully toward him. Then your impression lacked clinical value. His eyes dropped to the active order set on the screen. What is this? A transfer packet. I can read. Then spare us both the performance. Greer's attention fixed on the physician override field. The smoothness in his expression thinned by less than a degree. This is unauthorized. Reeves held up the signed chart. That signature is mine. Last I checked, my licensure remained valid, despite your tone. He is under federal restriction. He is under my care. Greer took one step closer to the station. Nurses down the hall did not look up directly, but Evelyn could feel them noticing anyway. The floor always knew when a conversation changed pressure. Dr. Greer said, voice lower now, you are inserting yourself into a containment matter you are not equipped to understand. Reeves turned to face him fully at last. And yet I remain uniquely equipped to identify hemorrhage, shock fever, and bureaucratic interference in treatment. 4 skills. 1 room. Remarkable economy. A clerk 3 feet away coughed into her fist to hide a reaction. Greer let the silence stretch, then changed targets. Of course he did. Ms. Shaw. A word. Number. The answer came out clean enough to surprise even Evelyn a little. His gaze settled on her. This is becoming unwise. Then stop helping it along. You are tired, emotionally compromised, and far too close to a patient who has every reason to manipulate personal history under field stress. My personal history appears to know your name before I do. That touched something cold behind his eyes. Your father made a catastrophic decision. Reeves did not move. Tessa, half a hall away, froze over an open drawer. Even the clerk at the printer went still for one brief second. Evelyn heard how fast Greer wanted the sentence back the moment he said it. That gave her all the proof she needed. Then why she asked, voice quiet enough to make him lean into it, "Are you still afraid of him?" The silence between them hardened. Greer recovered first, but not completely. The polish returned. The control did not. You are making assumptions well outside your competence. No, Evelyn said, I'm making observations. He looked toward Reeves. You want your career attached to this. Reeves gave him a stare flat enough to preserve tissue. My career is attached to a patient with a documented need and an undocumented problem standing in front of my station. One of the unit secretaries turned away very quickly and pretended to rearrange labels. Greer's jaw tightened by less than a line. This floor can be closed. Reeves nodded. Yes. After paperwork. Committees, legal phone calls, angry administrators who hate being woken before sunrise. Whereas this transfer can leave on my order in under 10 minutes. Choose which inconvenience you prefer. It was the first time all night Evelyn saw him forced to calculate in public. He looked at the terminal again, then at the room behind the glass where Marcus Vance lay under bright trauma lights, then back at Evelyn. You still have a future, Ms. Shaw, he said softly. A license, a profession, a life that does not have to be permanently altered by someone else's war. The offer came dressed as concern. The threat underneath it was as plain as gunmetal. Evelyn heard her mother's voice in the silence that followed. Do not say a thing just because the silence makes someone else uncomfortable. So she let the silence stand until Greer had to inhabit it. Then she said, My ordinary life seems to have included a fake death notice, a watched mother, and a federal liar in a winter coat. I am not sure ordinary survived the hour. For the first time, irritation flashed openly across his face. He stepped back, not retreating, repositioning. Do not leave the floor. Evelyn almost laughed at the absurdity of the command now. That sounds less effective every time. Greer looked at Reeves one last time. This becomes yours. Reeves answered without missing a beat. It became mine when he bled on my sheets. Greer turned and walked away. The second he rounded the corner, Tessa abandoned the linen bin fight and came fast to the station. That man gives rich serial killer energy. Reeves rubbed a hand over her mouth. Please put that in softer language if administration asks. Number. Fair enough. Tessa looked at the live order set on the screen and then at Evelyn. Tell me what you need. Evelyn felt the force of that simple question more than she expected. Need had become such a dangerous word tonight that hearing it offered without angle nearly undid her. I need the road to the secure elevator bank kept clear without looking. Kept clear. Tessa nodded like she had just been asked for gauze. Done. I need no one asking where I'm going. Also done. Reeves cut in. And I need one decent pressure bag from ICU because ours keeps failing when the gods are bored. Tessa was already moving. I will steal one with dignity. The floor around them continued pretending to be ordinary. Phones rang. Someone laughed too loudly at something harmless. A psych patient shouted from a room near the end of the hall that nobody respected his constitutional rights. The beauty of hospitals was that chaos used correctly could become camouflage. Mercer returned from the service corridor 2 minutes later. They're in, he said quietly. How many? Reeves asked. 2 on the stretcher team. 2 with the vehicle downstairs. All in medical transit jackets. No visible weapons. How visible are the men Greer left on the station? Visible enough to matter. Reeves glanced at the clock on the wall. 4:37 a.m. The hour when exhaustion began eroding caution in weaker people and sharpening it in the rest. Then we move before they remember ambition, she said. They went back into Trauma 1 together. Marcus Vance was awake, though the word hardly seemed large enough for what he was doing. Holding consciousness looked less like wakefulness and more like combat. Fever had sharpened the planes of his face. Pain sat in the corners of his mouth. Yet, when Evelyn stepped to the bed, his eyes found her immediately clear through all of it. We're moving you, she said. His voice was almost gone. You decided. Yes. He watched her face for a long second. That is your last easy answer. There haven't been many of those. Reeves checked the line at his neck and pressed 2 fingers to the dressing. I need him stable enough to survive a turn a hallway and an elevator. That is all I am asking from the universe. The universe is notoriously unhelpful, Evelyn said. Then we rely on skill and stubbornness instead. Mercer moved to the foot of the bed. Transport team is 1 minute out. Vance's gaze shifted from Mercer to Reeves, then back to Evelyn. You can still walk away. She began disconnecting what needed to travel and securing what could not. Portable monitor leads, oxygen line. Enough slack in the IV tubing to survive bad corners and impatient hands. The routine soothed her because it belonged to her. Not breakwater, not Greer, not the dead and not quite dead architecture of her family's hidden life. This part was medicine. This part answered to touch sequence and nerve. That option expired, she said quietly, when you came in wearing my father's name. Something moved behind his eyes at that. Not triumph, not relief. Recognition of cost. You understand what Point Loma means now. I understand enough. He studied her, as if measuring whether enough would hold under motion. Reeves glanced between them. I would love someday to work with people whose mysteries do not involve coastal infrastructure. Mercer's mouth shifted again at one corner. Then the curtain at the entrance moved, and two men in dark blue transport jackets rolled in a critical care stretcher dressed in hospital linen oxygen tank secured beneath portable monitor clipped cleanly to the side. At a glance, they looked routine. At a second glance, nothing about them wasted movement the way orderlies usually did. The taller one held out a clipboard to Reeves. Transfer acknowledgement. She read it in a scan. Internal destination routing. Temporary critical care hold. Physician override. The paperwork matched the order she had built down to the phrasing. Whoever had prepared it understood either hospitals or deception unusually well. Reeves signed first, hard, quick strokes. Evelyn signed beneath as primary nursing contact. The shorter transport man moved to the bedside. On your count, Reeves pointed one finger at his chest. If any line pulls any dressing opens or any monitor lead goes dark, I become your educational experience. Yes, doctor. Evelyn leaned in close to Vance while she secured the last of the line tape. Stay with me. His mouth moved with the smallest ghost of dry humor left in it. There are easier ways to disappoint a federal operator. Good, she said. Disappoint him quietly. Outside the curtain, footsteps approached at a faster pace than before. Mercer's head turned first. Now. Reeves looked at the transport team. Move him. At that exact moment, Agent Nolan Greer stepped through the curtain. He did not rush. Men like him almost never did. He entered as if the room had always belonged to him and everyone else was merely late in recognizing it. His eyes took in the transport stretcher, the signed forms Reeves squared at the bedside Mercer near the foot Evelyn, with one hand on the rail. No, he said. Reeves did not blink. That is not a medical term. His gaze fixed on the transfer paperwork. This movement is unauthorized. It is physician-authorized, Reeves said, which is what matters inside my bay. Greer held out his hand toward Evelyn, the chart. She kept the clipboard at her side, read it at the station. I can read it here. You can do many things elsewhere. The air in the room changed all at once. Vance looked from one face to another without moving his head. Mercer shifted one half step. Nothing aggressive, just enough to alter the geometry around the bed. Greer took another step in. You are making a mistake. Evelyn felt the dog tag against her chest, and the folded note pressed behind it like a second heartbeat. Then document your concern. One of the transport men moved closer to the side rail. Reeves set both hands at her hips. If you obstruct a medically necessary transfer after I have documented instability and interference, I will put your full name in the chart, then in the incident report, then in the hands of legal. Do you understand me? Greer's eyes hardened. Doctor, you do not understand what this patient represents. Reeves gave him a stare so cold it could have slowed bleeding. I understand exactly what he represents in this building. Liability if mishandled. Mortality if delayed. My responsibility until proven otherwise. He looked at Mercer. Step away. Mercer did not move. The two transport men were already in position now. Evelyn checked the line one last time. Reeves looked once at the monitor, then at the bed. On 3, she said. 1, 2, 3. They lifted. Vance sucked in a hard breath through clenched teeth but made no sound beyond that. The transfer onto the critical care stretcher happened in one controlled motion, all muscle memory and practiced hands. The monitor chirped sharp once, then steadied. Blood stayed contained. Oxygen stayed in place. Mercer peeled away just enough to let the stretcher clear. Greer stepped forward at the same instant, and Reeves moved directly into his path, not touching, simply occupying the space with the absolute certainty of a surgeon who had decided this was now her line. If you put a hand on my patient, she said, I will own the paperwork for the rest of your natural life. For the first time all night, Greer stopped because someone made him. The pause lasted only long enough for the stretcher wheels to bite into motion. Evelyn fell into position beside Vance's shoulder, one hand on the IV pole, one on the side rail. Mercer moved to the foot. The transport team guided them through the curtain and into the corridor where the whole floor seemed to inhale around the site. Nurses looked up. A housekeeping worker flattened himself against the wall with a mop in one hand. Tessa barked at an orderly to clear the lane with such convincing irritation it sounded like routine. The wheels whispered over tile. Behind them, Greer came out of the bay at last. Not running, never running, but moving faster now. The secure elevator bank stood ahead, under cold, white light stainless steel doors, waiting at the end of a hall suddenly too long and not long enough. And for the first time since the ambulance doors burst open, Evelyn understood in her bones that medicine was no longer just the thing keeping Marcus Vance alive. It was the only language left strong enough to move all of them. The corridor narrowed as they pushed toward the secure elevator bank, the wheels whispering over polished tile, the portable monitor ticking out a rhythm too thin to trust. Evelyn walked at Marcus Vance's shoulder with one hand steady on the rail and the other managing the line, counting breaths without meaning to. 3 short. 1 shallow catch. Then another 3. The right side still lagged with every inhale where the fragmentation had torn through muscle. His skin had taken on that dangerous heat that lived halfway between fever and collapse. "Stay with me," she said. His eyes opened with visible effort. "Still here." The answer barely made sound, but it was enough. At the nurse's station behind them, a clerk rose halfway out of her chair, saw Agent Greer striding after the stretcher, and sat back down with the particular stillness of someone choosing to survive the morning by becoming furniture. Tessa was moving in the opposite direction with a stack of chart binders held high against her chest, cutting across the corridor just long enough to slow one of the suited men trying to close distance from Greer's left. "Oh my God, sorry," she said with a performance so bright it almost glowed. Papers slid. A binder hit the floor. Another man had to step around her. 3 seconds gone. Maybe 4. In a normal shift, those seconds would have meant nothing. Tonight they were blood and distance. Reeves came with them for the first stretch, not beside the stretcher, but just off it, loud enough for anyone watching to hear only medicine. "Mind the flank line. Do not let that pressure bag drop. If his saturation falls under 90, I want oxygen flow adjusted before someone starts apologizing to me." "Yes, Doctor," Evelyn said. Mercer looked once over his shoulder. "Hall's still clear." "Then stop narrating good luck and keep moving," Reeves said. The secure elevator stood open at the end of the hall, light spilling across the threshold in a hard white square. Stainless steel. Scuffed corners. A narrow reflection of everyone inside this moment caught and flattened in the doors. The transport men angled the stretcher toward it, efficient and unhurried in the way truly urgent people sometimes were. Panic wasted space. These men did not. Then Greer's voice cut across the corridor. "Stop the transfer." It was not shouted. That would have been easier. He said it in a tone trained to sound like the room should already have agreed. Several people did stop. A respiratory tech beside the supply closet froze with an empty cart in both hands. An orderly, halfway through double doors, looked back over one shoulder. Somewhere beyond the station, a phone kept ringing, absurdly cheerful and entirely unanswered. Reeves turned before the stretcher did. "Agent, if you would like to challenge my judgment, you may do it after my patient is not actively unstable and after you have acquired the paperwork to become somebody else's problem." Greer closed the distance until he stood less than 6 feet from the foot of the stretcher. Not close enough to touch, close enough to make touch feel possible. "This elevator is restricted." "So is my patient's," Reeves said. His gaze shifted to Evelyn. "Miss Shaw, step away now." She looked at him, then at her own reflection in the elevator doors. Navy scrubs. Hair pinned back too tightly. A face so pale under the lights it looked almost unreal. There was blood on the sleeve near her wrist from the transfer. Someone else's blood. Vance's. Maybe some of her own, from where a glove had pinched skin without her noticing. She barely recognized herself in the reflection, but she recognized the posture. Her mother had stood like that at the kitchen counter sometimes when strangers came to the door. Not visibly afraid. not at ease, settled into endurance so deeply it looked like quiet. Greer mistook her silence for calculation in his favor. "You still have a license," he said. "A profession, a future not permanently damaged by a situation you do not understand." The line beneath the line arrived cleanly. "Step away, and I may leave enough of your life standing for you to return to it." If he had said those words 2 hours earlier, perhaps they would have landed differently. But the life he offered back to her no longer existed in the same shape. Her father was not dead. Her mother had not simply drifted into confusion and ritual. The grief that built her adult life had not been grief alone. It had been a structure erected around a lie. She looked from Greer to the stretcher to Marcus Vance fighting to stay conscious under heat and pain and blood loss to Naomi Reeves standing rigidly between medicine and power, as if that had always been her natural position in the world. Then she stepped backward into the elevator with the patient, not away from him, with him. Greer saw the choice happen. Something colder than irritation entered his expression. Something that belonged to a man watching a civilian cross from inconvenience into opposition. Mercer pushed the foot of the stretcher over the threshold. The transport team guided the rails clear. Evelyn kept the IV line high and turned just enough to avoid snagging it on the door edge. Reeves remained outside. She did not step in. This far was her protection. Farther would become disappearance. For one strange second, the whole night narrowed to the space between the two women. "Do not make me regret this," Reeves said. Evelyn met her eyes. "You gave medicine a chance." Reeves' mouth moved almost into a smile and stopped. "That is not the same thing as innocence." "No," Evelyn said. "It is better." Greer made one sharp move toward the opening. Mercer shifted instantly, one hand braced against the inner frame body blocking just enough to turn progress into risk. Reeves lifted her voice with surgical fury. "Agent, if you interfere with this elevator while I have a critical patient in transfer, I will testify to it under oath with timestamps." Greer stopped at the threshold. The doors slid inward. His eyes never left Evelyn's face until the last inch of corridor vanished, and stainless steel sealed the compartment shut. The sound changed at once. Hospital noise dropped away. No hallway, no station, no ringing phone. Only the enclosed hum of cables and motor, the clipped cadence of the portable monitor, the oxygen hiss, the faint vibration beneath their shoes. The elevator began to descend. Nobody spoke for the first second. Then Marcus Vance made a low sound in his throat and his hand twitched against the sheet. Evelyn leaned over him at once, checking the saturation that lined the dressing at the flank. Fresh red had touched through at the lower edge, but not enough to stop them. "Not yet." "Talk to me," she said. He looked up at her through fever and exhaustion. "You got in. That appears to be how elevators work." One of the transport men looked straight ahead with admirable discipline. Mercer let out the ghost of a breath through his nose that might have become a laugh if this had been another life. The taller transport operative checked the descending floor lights. "Loading level in 30 seconds. Evelyn glanced at him. "Who are you?" "Contract Medical Transit," he said. Mercer answered from the foot of the stretcher. "Safe enough." She almost said safe enough was not a category she recognized. Then she stopped herself. In trauma medicine, safe enough was half the work. Stable enough for scan, controlled enough for surgery, awake enough for consent. You survived by learning the difference between ideal and possible. Marcus Vance turned his face slightly toward her. "You can still step off at the next door. Number." The answer came too quickly to sound brave. It sounded truthful, which was rarer. His eyes studied her not as a patient looked at a nurse and not as a commander looked at a subordinate. As if he were measuring whether the reality of what she had chosen matched the words. "You walk back out," he said, voice thinned by pain. "Greer files you under difficult, maybe unstable, maybe compromised by fatigue. He leaves you a career with cracks in it but still standing. And if I keep going, you belong to the map." Evelyn adjusted the blanket near his shoulder because her hands needed something to do. I think I belonged to it before I knew it existed. That drew the smallest shift across his face. Not humor. Recognition again. The elevator passed another floor. The number blinked down. The compartment's light cast everybody in a pale industrial color that made fatigue look skeletal. Mercer checked his watch. 20 seconds. Evelyn felt the dog tag in her chest pocket and took it out without really deciding to. The metal lay warm in her palm now from body heat, but a trace of old cold still lived in its core. Daniel Shaw. Last active verification. 4 years ago. The simplicity of the stamping was almost obscene. A machine cut those letters. The machine did not know it was undoing 19 years of mourning. Vance watched the tag in her hand and his expression changed. He kept it close, he said. Evelyn looked up. Since when? Since the first failed extraction I was part of. The phrase hit before the meaning of it fully arranged itself. There were others. Yes. How many? His gaze held hers. Enough to lose men I respected. Mercer's face altered by a degree. Memory moving under discipline. Not a crack. Just weather over stone. Evelyn closed her fingers around the tag. And he is still alive. Yes. That certainty mattered now more than any explanation. She took it the way she took pulse under skin, as fact until proven otherwise. The elevator slowed. A faint jolt. The floor number stopped. The transport men straightened all readiness now. The doors opened. The restricted loading level beyond was colder than the floors above, and all poured concrete and painted lines under bright industrial light. The air smelled different too. Less antiseptic. More metal diesel damp ocean chill moving in through dock access somewhere beyond the corridor. A white medical transport unit waited at the far end with rear doors open and engine running low. 2 more figures stood near it in the same dark transit jackets, one at the rail, one scanning the hall. For one brief second, the open space felt more dangerous than the hospital had. The hallway down here had no comforting illusion of public witness. No families, no clerks, no linen carts. If something went wrong, it would go wrong fast, and mostly alone. Mercer saw the risk in the same instant. Move. They did. The stretcher rolled hard over the seam between elevator floor and concrete wheels cracking softly over the edge. Evelyn kept pace, one hand steadying the line, the other pressed against the rail near Vance's arm. The monitor numbers jumped with motion. His saturation dipped, recovered, dipped again. "Breathe with me," she said. He obeyed because whatever else Marcus Vance was, he understood instructions given by someone trying to keep him alive. In through the nose, slow out, again. Halfway to the transport unit, a stairwell door at the far end banged open. Voices. Not close enough yet to become hands, but close enough to erase any fantasy they had been given more time than this. The driver's side transport man looked up sharply. Mercer did not bother to look back. Go. The team quickened without breaking control. The rear ramp of the vehicle was already down. The taller transit man locked the stretcher guides into place with one hard motion. Together, they ran the wheels up the incline. Evelyn climbed in after the head end, ducking beneath the frame and moving automatically to secure line monitor and oxygen to the interior mounts. Mercer came in last, one hand on the rail until the final second. The rear doors slammed shut behind him. That sound went through the compartment like finality. Inside, the transport unit was warmer than the loading corridor lined with cabinets and secure bins bench seating along one wall, oxygen mounts and medical restraints along the other. Not a military vehicle. Not exactly civilian either. A moving clinic stripped down to purpose. The engine vibration hummed up through the floor. The vehicle began to move before everyone was fully seated. Evelyn checked Vance first because that was who she knew how to save. Pupils. Pulse. Line. Dressing. Oxygen. Blood pressure still soft. Fever still high. He had survived the move. Surviving the rest would be another negotiation entirely. Mercer braced on the bench opposite, one hand on a rail body angled with the turn of the vehicle as it pulled out from the loading bay. Outside, dawn had not yet arrived, but night was thinning. Through the rear side window, Evelyn caught only fragments. Concrete wall, service lights, a glimpse of wet pavement silvering under mist. Then the vehicle turned, and the hospital disappeared from view. For the first time since the ambulance doors had opened upstairs, there was enclosure that belonged to them and not to anybody else. That should have felt safer. Instead, it made the intimacy of the situation impossible to ignore. Marcus Vance's eyes were on her. She realized then that for all the blood and chaos and revelation, they had not had one truly quiet moment since he arrived. Not a single space where truth could land without someone else trying to seize it. Now they did. The lighthouse, he said. Evelyn leaned closer to hear him over the engine. Point Loma. He gave the smallest nod. Do not go there expecting him. I know. It is the first key, not the door. She looked at him, at the effort each sentence cost, at the fact that even now he was spending what strength he had on clarity rather than comfort. What exactly am I looking for? A proof set. Something your mother could have authenticated if she'd lived long enough to be brought in clean. The words tightened across her chest. And I'm supposed to know how. His answer came softer. You already do. You just don't know which memories matter yet. Evelyn sat back by inches. The vehicle took another turn. Somewhere up front, the driver spoke into a low radio mic and got one clipped response she could not make out. My whole life, she said quietly, I thought my mother was becoming someone else at the end. Vance watched her without interruption. I was patient with her, Evelyn said, until I wasn't. I told myself I was tired, overworked, scared, which was true, but I also thought she was slipping into habits that meant nothing. The recipes, the weather pages. The same stories told almost but not quite the same way. I thought grief had turned her inward. His voice roughened. It did, just not only by grief. That landed with the ache of a bruise pressed exactly right. Not cruel. Precise. She waited for him, Evelyn said. Yes, knowing he was alive. Knowing he was not gone the way they said. A long silence followed that. Not empty. Full of all the nights Ruth Shaw had stood at the sink in darkness, while the daughter in the hall behind her thought she was witnessing sorrow and not vigilance. Mercer shifted on the bench. She held better than most would have. Evelyn looked at him. You knew her, not directly. He paused, searching for the least inadequate version of the truth. I knew of her. In the network, she had a reputation. Not by name, by behavior. The widow who almost never made the same mistake twice. Something about that nearly broke her open. The widow, a title built out of a lie, and yet somehow earned anyway. Evelyn looked back down at the dog tag in her palm. She should have been told more. Yes, Mercer said. She should not have died carrying that alone. Number. No defense, no strategic explanation. Just agreement, and because of that it hurt even more. The vehicle merged into city streets. Through the side window, San Diego was beginning to wake in pieces. A gas station lit like a stage in the dark. A bakery truck at an intersection. The first pale suggestion of morning along the edges of low cloud over the harbor. People somewhere were turning on kitchen lights and tying shoes and starting coffee, entering an ordinary day without any idea that a nurse in blood-marked scrubs sat in the back of a moving medical unit holding proof her father had never been dead. Vance's fingers twitched against the sheet. Evelyn set the dog tag in her lap and reached to check his wrist. His pulse beat fast and thin beneath her fingertips. He turned his hand before she could draw away, not enough to stop her, only enough to direct the contact. Then, with slow, deliberate effort, he lifted 2 fingers toward his brow. It was not the violent, instinctive salute from the trauma bay born out of blood loss and recognition. This one was weaker, slower, and somehow more intentional. The angle of his wrist was still exact. The meaning of it reached her before language did. Not deference, not ceremony, not military reflex offered to rank. Acknowledgement. A threshold crossed and named. Welcome to the map. Her throat tightened with something too layered to call grief and too old to call fear. She caught his forearm gently and lowered his hand back to the sheet before the effort hurt him further. You need your strength, she said. His eyes did not leave hers. You understand now. Evelyn looked at him for a long second. In the soft compartment light stripped of the hospital in Greer and all the fluorescent violence of the night, Marcus Vance looked less like a myth and more like a man held together by training loyalty pain and stubborn purpose. A man who had bled his way into her life because someone she loved had once trusted him enough to build a final route through him. Yes, she said softly. I understand enough. Mercer checked his watch again. 7 minutes. To where Evelyn asked. Temporary hold. Clean room. No official bed assignment. We stabilize him there or move him again if we have to. Who controls it? People Greer doesn't own yet. The yet mattered. Everything tonight seemed to be built on that word. Not safe. Safe enough. Not lost. Not yet. Not exposed. Not yet. Not dead. Not yet. Evelyn slid the dog tag back into her scrub pocket and felt the folded Point Loma note behind it. A lighthouse. A proof set. Some fragment of her mother's hidden language waiting to be recognized by the daughter who had not known she was being taught. What happens if Greer tracks the route? Mercer's answer was as flat as weather. Then we move again. No backup, no larger team, no official protection. He held her gaze. Official protection is one of the reasons your father vanished. There was no argument to make against that. Vance's eyes drifted shut, then opened again, as if sleep itself had become suspicious. When we reached the lighthouse, he said, voice scraping lower, Now do not look for the truth where it looks important. Evelyn leaned close. Then where? Look for what a careful woman would hide in plain sight. Her mother's hands moved through memory at once. Flower on recipe cards. A thumb pressing the spine of a hymnal. Pencil tucked behind one ear while she copied down weather numbers from the paper. Not the dramatic version of secrecy. The domestic kind. The kind the world laughed at until it turned out to be the only thing that lasted. The transport unit slowed for a turn. A horn sounded somewhere outside, distant and annoyed. Dawn was coming more clearly now, not as sunlight yet, but as a thinning of black into dark blue along the edge of the windows. Evelyn looked down at her hands. The left still bore a faint impression where Vance had gripped her wrist in the trauma bay. The right carried a smear of dried blood near the thumb she had somehow missed. Her life before tonight had been built around other people's emergencies. Car wrecks, overdoses, arterial bleeds, children with broken bones, Marines with burns, construction workers with collapsed lungs. She knew how to meet catastrophe at the level of the body. This was different. This was catastrophe with memory attached, with lineage, with a father somewhere alive in the dark and a mother already gone beyond apology. She reached into her pocket again and wrapped her hand around Daniel Shaw's dog tag until the edges bit into her palm. Warm metal, real weight. Outside, the city kept waking. Inside, the engine carried them farther from the hospital, from Greer, from the clean, false story she had lived inside for nearly 20 years. No one spoke for a while after that. The silence held because it had earned the right. Mercer watched the route reflected in the windshield partition. The transport medic checked the monitor once and looked away. Vance drifted near the edge of sleep and pain, never fully giving himself to either. Evelyn sat beside him with her father's name in her fist and listened to the engine. At some point, the skyline shifted, and the scent through the vents changed just enough for her to catch salt under diesel. Harbor air. It struck her with the old memory of dawn marinas and coffee in paper cups, and Daniel Shaw's hand steady on the wheel while she leaned half asleep against the passenger door. Lantern Cove. The phrase moved through her now with a different shape. Not only childhood, not only loss. A marker left behind for this exact moment, waiting years to be spoken aloud again. Vance opened his eyes once more. So, he said barely above the engine, "Where are you watching from, Evelyn?" For a second, she thought the fever had driven him somewhere strange. Then she understood, not a joke exactly, a way of asking where she stood now in this new geography of truth. She looked out the narrow window at a city beginning to show itself in the first gray before sunrise, and answered with the only thing that felt true. From the place where he stopped being dead, Vance closed his eyes again. This time, the corner of his mouth moved just enough to tell her he had heard. Evelyn lowered her gaze to the dog tag in her hand, and spoke so quietly that even in the enclosed compartment, the words barely disturbed the air. "You were never gone." Then she closed her fingers around her father's name and did not let go.